So before we, I guess, start looking at the content, I thought we'd start by talking about how to approach HSC economics. So first things first, I think you've got to find your best study method. Economics is a little bit of a weird subject in that, like, yes, there's a lot of content to know and a lot of just memorization, but you do also have to know, like, a lot of different, like, how to graph. You have to know a lot of statistics. You have to know, like, just a whole bunch of random things about, like, the budget and things like that. And you've got to be really up to date with your economics. So studying for ecos can be a little bit different to your other subjects. For me, I preferred learning by watching videos and anything to do with the graph. I liked to annotate my graphs. I think annotating graphs helps you get a better picture of what's actually going on within the graph. And also doing practice papers. I think everybody should be doing practice papers, not just some people. Especially a lot of people think, leave the practice papers to when you're getting closer to trials and things, but start now. I'm assuming most schools do topic 1 in term 4. So start looking through HSC papers, other past papers, and picking out questions about topic 1, particularly essay questions. With economics, the essays can be super, super overwhelming because they can ask you to write an essay on literally anything you've learned from the beginning to the end of Y12. So start looking at those past essay questions and stuff now. But yeah, just really try and nut out what your preferred study method is going to be. I think knowing how you like to study now will really help you along the track, creating good habits before your big exam blocks, so before your trials and the HSC. Again, with economics, better to understand things to memorize them. You really want to try and think about the content you're learning about and try and understand what's happening, why is it happening, things like that. I think with economics in particular, just trying to memorize things is not going to get you a top mark essay or a top mark short response question, because your markers are really trying to see if you can create your own judgments about what's going on, if you can sort of give your own interpretation or a unique perspective on what you're learning about. Because a lot of economics economic essays, I should say, is about providing a judgment on what's happening, whether a policy is effective or not, things like that. So it's really important you understand, the rationale behind a certain policy. And once you understand, the rationale behind it, then you can create a judgment, an effective judgment, which will give you that higher response, essay. With economics, it's super important that you are really, really on top of your stats, case studies, trends, things like that, and to collate all these statistics in whatever's an easy form to you, whether that's a graphic, one big document's got your stats on it, whether that's flashcards, anything like that. Just have your statistics somewhere easy to memorize them, and yeah, just be really, really on top of them. Try and get them throughout the year. I think if you try and pick up your stats and find case studies and things like that as you're learning about the content, it seemed a lot more approachable than trying to find statistics for every single thing you've ever learned just before your trial period. So try and get those stats as you're going. Doesn't have to be a lot, just a few stats for each sort of thing you're learning about, a few examples of policies, trends, things like that as you go along. And then just be super familiar with your syllabus like every other subject. And like I said before, start looking at your essays now and writing those essay plans. Just another thing a lot of people get confused about is the contemporary economics understanding. So I thought we'd talk about it before we start looking at the content. So a lot of people ask, if I'm studying economics, do I have to read the news or watch the news? I would say it's good to read the news. I wouldn't say it's a must. If you don't have time, you don't have time. If it doesn't interest you, don't stress about it. But it is good to sort of know, if you're spending 10 minutes a week, say that's on a Sunday night, just thinking about what's happened in the economy in the past week, it'll give you some really, really good statistics and examples to pop into your essays. So that's can be Sydney Morning Herald, ABC, if you've got the Apple News app on your phone, SBS, the RBA News, things like that. It's just like using quotes in English. The more you look at your quotes, the more you sort of expose yourself to those quotes, the better you're going to understand them and the more you're going to remember them. The other thing is, a lot of people ask is, in terms of the word contemporary, how current do statistics need to be? So you sitting in economics don't need to know any statistics pre-1990s. I would say avoid giving like current examples from things before 2008 unless you don't have another choice. Generally, 2020, 2021 is accepted as current, and your HSC paper is usually written around the middle of the year. So they're not going to be expecting you to have statistics from like the day before your exam. Like it's not like that current. But there are a few exceptions to that rule. The things that you should always have the most up-to-date examples for are cash rate, your economic growth rate, exchange rates. Unemployment rate is also a really good one to have. So there are a few examples of statistics and things that I would recommend having the most up-to-date example for. But in general, your examples 2020, 21 post that is fine. I would also say if you are going to be talking about the budget in your essays or like in your exam papers at all, do try and have the most recent budget and like be up to date with your policies. Though I will say the one exception to having current statistics, I will say, is if you want to talk specifically about the GFC in 2008, that's fine as long as you do mention that you're specifically talking about the GFC and like there's a point to talking about it. So for those of you who don't know, that's the global financial crisis in 2008. And talking about COVID as well. So some people will say that 2020 may not be current, but I will say if you're going to talk about it in context of like COVID shutdown and stuff, that's all fine. And then the other big question, how are you meant to remember all of this? So tied in with your theory, I think for me when I was studying economics, like making the statistics relevant to my theoretical knowledge helped me understand like, okay, like this statistic actually makes sense. It makes sense that the unemployment rate was so high in COVID because of like shutdowns and like the derived demand for labor and stuff like that. I also think color helped a lot. So for me, whenever I was writing my notes, if I had a statistic, I would change the color of the text. So all my statistics popped out. And so funnily enough, like in my exams, like I remembered things based on what color they were. And that really helped me. As well as summary tables and graphs. Try and make things as succinct as possible. All in all, you can write 20 pages of notes for topic 1, but you're not going to be writing 20 pages in your exam, right? You're going to need to know the key points, and then you can elaborate on that in your exam. Quickly, just a little bit of mention to COVID. You guys are really lucky, I guess, in terms of economics, that you are doing economics post-COVID, because COVID gives you a lot to talk about. There are so many things you can pick out for COVID. Thinking about economic performance since the GFC, like it was so bad. Understandably so bad, but it gives you a lot to talk about in terms of economic growth. The fact that our economy was contracting for the first time in 28 years in that first March quarter for 2020. And then also explaining in Australia that some of that can be explained by the bushfires, and then the early response to COVID, travel bans, again with economic growth, thinking about our GDP and how it shrank, and comparing that to past records. Super important to know your economic trends. So COVID is really good in that it sort of goes against the trends in Australia, and it's good to talk about. It gives you complexity to your essay. Thinking about how much money Australia spent on COVID. This is also going to become really relevant in topic 3 and topic 4 when you start looking at fiscal policy, because it's really important to talk about that. Australia is trying to contract our budgets because we spent so much money in COVID, and so it'll take years and years and years, but the government is slowly trying to spend less money so that we can start to repay our COVID debt. But then with Australia, also talking about how in COVID, a lot of our goods and services, I shouldn't say services, a lot of our goods, we still traded. So like relative to the rest of the world, not that Australia by any means was in a good position, but relative to the rest of the world, we were like comparatively in a fairly okay position because we export a lot of like raw goods, so like, from like mining and things like that. So relative, Australia was actually not in that bad of a position because of what we exported and because our government spent so much money. So from that, you can also say we recovered really, really quickly. The recovery from COVID is a really interesting thing to talk about in your essays, if it fits, because it was a really quick recovery. And it's also good to talk about because you can talk about like the pros and cons of that. And that, like, yes, we recovered quickly, but we recovered quickly because we spent billions and billions and billions of dollars. So, you know, talking about the pros and cons of, is it worth going into long-term debt in order to have the short-term recovery from COVID? And talking about like, why would it be worth it? So that thinking about things like quality of life, employment, Australia's economic growth, international trade, and then the cons of, we're going to be paying off that debt for years. Like, there's a lot of things, if you like read about it, which hopefully you should be doing, saying that, like, you know, our grandkids are still going to be repaying COVID debt because the government just spent so much money. So you can talk about the pros and cons of that recovery. And then, like I was saying before, Australia's health and economic outcomes were actually like they weren't good, but they were favourable in relation to everybody else. Our economies outperformed all major advanced economies in 2020, and our labour market had a really quick recovery. So this will be really interesting in topic 3 when you guys start learning about the labour market and like employment. In that we had a really big spike in unemployment, but when you look at how that recovered, it was actually a really good recovery, and we reached our Nauru fairly quickly. So yeah, compared to other major advanced economies, Australia was the first economy to have seen hours worked in employment recover to pre-pandemic levels. So you can talk a lot about that as well. So that's actually really interesting to talk about in topic 1. When you start to talk about like trade and financial flows and things like that, you'll start to see that Australia's trade and financial flows during COVID, like, yes, they shrunk, but they did not shrink as much as pretty much the rest of the world, because Australia exported lots of like natural goods. So pandemic or not, people need coal, you know, people need our farming exports, things like that. So it's stuff like, because Australia exports all those essential goods, our trade flows are actually not that bad comparatively. And so, yeah, the outlook for the global economy has strengthened. Global GDP is forecast to grow by 6% in 2021. So that was the statistic at the time. Important also to be aware of comparing like outlooks to reality. So the outlook was 6% in 2021. Compare that to what actually happened in 2021. And you can compare that and discuss that as well. So yeah, that's a bit of an overview and just a quick chat about COVID, because COVID is such a good example to talk about in your economics essays. So you guys are lucky that you're like post-COVID. So yeah.